David, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And, David and his team have done an excellent job in assembling a terrific program for us today. And as you can tell by the working group title, Digital Technology Enables Energy Companies to Safely Work. And we're going to be addressing one of the most challenging conditions affecting all of us. And to just grossly underestimate the obvious, the COVID-19 pandemic has had an enormous impact on all of us from both a personal and a professional perspective. And whether you're a utility or an operating asset owner, an equipment supplier, a contractor or service provider, and we have the entire spectrum represented here today on the call, your business has been disrupted in some form by the pandemic. Energy generators want and need to keep their assets operating safely and reliably. Equipment and service providers need access to their customers. They need to help supply new equipment and also maintain existing equipment. And contractors, like the companies that I've worked for in the past, have large variable field staff and craft workers that need to be maintained safely and dispatched to deploy and meet their respective missions on behalf of the contractors and their customers. So the bottom line is this: generators want to generate. The contractor and service providers don't want to be tagged as that party that brought a workforce in to infect their customers' operating asset. So what should we be doing as part of our respective businesses from a risk mitigation and management viewpoint? What is the exposure for doing nothing or just the bare minimum? How do we deal with the varying testing, reporting, and tracking protocols? What type of flexibility does our unique business require? What are some of the alternatives available to us? And most importantly, as it always comes down to, what's the cost of these platforms? Can we afford them? And what could be the cost if we take little or no action? So as you've heard the panelists today, we've got a great cross representation, and they're going to be able to have and lead a meaningful dialogue to address some of these questions. And as you will see, the applications that they developed, while they're certainly applicable to COVID-19, they're not exclusively tied to the pandemic. So it'll be good to hear beyond, because as David said, we hear the news every day, and there was some terrific news coming into us today from Moderna that there may be another independent vaccine headed our direction. But there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's still a lot of people, and we're still in the midst of it as we see the numbers from testing appear on the news all throughout the day. I was going to say it daily, but it's throughout the day. And as David said, it's nice for us to get together, and sometime in the near future, we hope we'll be able to do that face to face. But however, the ultimate goal of a session like this is to provide the participants with some useful takeaways. So we hope today's program will be informative and will give you some solutions that can either augment what you're currently using or perhaps provide you with a more comprehensive alternative. First, we have Mr. Ron Calhoun, who is the Chief Development Officer at SDI Labs, and he joined SDI in June after 3 years as the Chief Development Officer with Elias Health System. Prior to that, Mr. Calhoun served as the Managing Director of Healthcare Delivery System Transformation for Aon, and he also held leadership roles in the Remy Group and Wachovia. Earlier in his career, Ron was the Managing Director of Marsh's National Healthcare Practice, and he holds an accounting degree from the Citadel, as it pains me to say so, as a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, and his master's degree from Clemson University. Next, we have Paul Salterio, co-founder of Opal, who co-founded International Thermodyne, makers of Opal, in 2014. He previously served for 5 years as a partner of SIA Partners, a technology management consulting firm, and 7 years with Cerium Capital, a middle market investment bank. Mr. Solitario entered the banking industry in the 1980s and focused on technology markets. He earned his economics degree from William and Mary, no tribe, and attended the International School of Belgrade. Next, we have Mr. Ed White, Chairman and CEO of Field to Base, and partnered with Black and Veatch in the development of Cooperate. He founded Field to Base in 2003. In 1980, after working for Westinghouse Electric Corporation for several years, he founded Utility Translation Systems, a remote meter reading software company, which he sold to Itron in 1996. Mr. White served as Itron's Board of Directors Chairman until retiring in 2003. He's also the founder of White Ventures, LLC, a private equity and commercial real estate development company. Ed is a founding board member of the Research Triangle Clean Tech Cluster, and he earned his engineering degree from North Carolina State University. And we have Mr. David Martineau, as you heard, Deputy CEO and Energy Global Practice Head of SIA Partners. He is currently leading numerous initiatives in the energy, utilities, and environment practice globally, with a strong personal focus on electricity and gas. As the head of the Global AI and Data Science Business Unit, he helps executive committees leverage partnerships between people and technology to enhance their competitive advantage through new offerings, sharper value propositions, and more efficient processes. So I think after hearing the bios, abbreviated bios at that, of the individuals on the panel today, I think you'll agree we've got some heavy hitters here, and certainly capable of having a meaningful discussion. So with that, gentlemen, let's do this. I've got the clock. We'll start with Ron, if we can. Ron Calhoun, and if you would, Ron, take the baton and have at it.
Thank you, Walt. I thought I would take a few minutes, considering the fact that we're not only navigating this pandemic, but in our estimation, we're also navigating an infodemic, because there's just an enormous amount of misinformation that's floating around how we're managing this pandemic. A lot of it around testing. There's a lot of confusion around testing. So instead of going through a commercial about SDI Labs, I thought I would take a moment just to level set on some testing fundamentals. What does a smart testing program, what are some of the elements of a smart testing program? Well, first of all, the entity that's actually conducting the testing, you have to have the right infrastructure. You know, what are some of the factors related to the institutional support, supply chain availability? I know that in the press there's been a lot of news about inadequate supply chains, particularly as it relates to reagents. So, do you have the right infrastructure? Does your testing partner have the right infrastructure in place? Are you testing the right populations? And that just depends on the goal of the testing program itself. Are you using the right test? There's a lot of confusion around the different types of COVID-19 tests that are in the marketplace, and they're all appropriate for different settings. I wanted to talk about that here in a minute. Is the test being interpreted correctly? There's a wide variation in accuracy rates between these different types of tests and within specific tests themselves. And I want to talk about that for a moment. And are you taking the right action based on the test results? So I want to talk about accuracy. There's a lot of misinformation, frankly, on the issue of accuracy as it relates to these tests. There are two fundamental components to accuracy. One is sensitivity, and the other is specificity. Sensitivity of a test relates to how well the test correlates with the individual actually having the SARS-CoV-2 pathogen itself, or true positives. A test with a low sensitivity rate will produce more false negatives than those tests that have high sensitivity rates. The other element of accuracy is specificity. The specificity correlates with how well the test identifies whether the individual does not have the SARS-CoV-2 pathogen or the true negative. A low specificity rate will produce more false positives. So those are two key elements of accuracy. Another somewhat ephemeral element of accuracy has to do with prevalence rates. So the interpretation of a positive or a negative test varies based on the prevalence of that condition in a given population. And this is a kind of an ephemeral point, one that is often missed. But a positive predictive value is basically means the likelihood of a positive test is indeed a true positive increases as a subpopulation or a given population that's being tested actually has the condition or a high prevalence rate. Conversely, when the prevalence rate or condition in a given population is low, the percentage of false positives may be, in essence, unacceptably high. So it's very important to have a bead on the actual prevalence rate within the geography that you're conducting the test. And conversely, there's a negative predictive value, and that is the likelihood of a negative test result being a true negative decreases as more people in a given subpopulation have the condition. So this is something that's not really talked about a lot, but the algorithms that go into measuring a given test sensitivity rate and specificity rate, there is an element to that related to the actual prevalence rate of the subpopulation that you're testing. So now let's shift to the different types of tests that are in the market. There's really only three different types of tests that are currently being utilized. There's the antigen test, the antibody test, and the molecular test, or the RT-PCR. Each one of these tests are used are most appropriate in certain settings. So this is probably where most of the confusion is occurring across the entire landscape. That these tests are being used for different purposes that are beyond what they were originally designed for. So let me go into that for a little bit. An antigen test. An antigen test is basically designed for screening. What an antigen test does is it detects the specific proteins found on the surface of the virus itself, as opposed to the molecular structure of the virus. So it's looking for those proteins that are forming on the surface of the virus. It is really designed for screening. And what I mean by screening is broad populations to determine how many of them have the virus versus not have the virus. It's not looking at prevalence rates. It's not clinically significant, and I'll go into that in a moment. It is simply a screening vehicle. The problem with antigen tests is they are prone to low sensitivity rates, which basically means that they have a tendency to generate false negatives. That's the bad news. The good news is they have a low price point. They're relatively cheap, particularly the point of care versions of an antigen test. An antibody test or a serology test, the antigen test is really used for surveillance purposes or to identify the prevalence rate that I was alluding to earlier. What is the prevalence rate or the spread across a subpopulation? It's obviously not looking for the virus itself, but looking for the antibodies that have been formed as a result of the presence of the virus. It has the opposite problem of an antigen test in that it has a low specificity rate, which means antibody tests are prone to false positives. That's the bad news. The good news is that they have a low price point as well. They're relatively cheap. And the third primary test used to detect COVID-19 is the RT-PCR, or the reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test. It's a molecular test. It is actually designed to confirm the genetic sequence of the virus itself. And therein lies its accuracy level. It has neither a sensitivity problem nor a specificity problem. It is the gold standard in terms of determining whether the virus is present. It's about 99.99% accurate. So those are the three primary testing vehicles. Now you have overlaid onto that, you've got various specimen collection methodologies. I'm sure everybody early on the onset of the virus saw all those photographs of the cars in line doing nasopharyngeal with the long swab, basically the brain stem tickle, where you're going up the nostril in the back of the nostril cavity to collect the appropriate amount of DNA. Very uncomfortable, virtually impossible to self-administer. But it's really been kind of the reason for its prevalence is really the tradition. It's just been around. It's been used for years in other viral settings. So that's kind of how COVID-19 testing started. SDI Labs started with oral pharyngeal because if the data doesn't support it, we won't do it. And we found that oral pharyngeal swabbing actually collected more DNA material than nasopharyngeal, and it's much easier to administer. The third specimen collection methodology is sputum or phlegm. The problem with that is that the virus actually has to be present for your body to produce the phlegm. So it's difficult to do in across a broad population. The fourth is saliva. Saliva has been traditionally a difficult specimen collection methodology. It's the bacteria present in your saliva makes DNA isolation somewhat difficult. I will talk in a moment about SDI's extraction and purification process, which we did not start out with saliva. We started out with oropharyngeal, but we've done some pretty interesting innovations around saliva specimen collection, and we have now pivoted to saliva from oropharyngeal. It's easier. Nasopharyngeal, oropharyngeal both require specimen collection supervision. You have to have somebody actually supervise the specimen collection. Saliva does not. So there's a big benefit in saliva specimen collection. And I wanted to kind of pivot a moment just to talk about what is different about SDI Labs. There's about 200,000 independent reference laboratories in the US. Most of them are tied to universities or academic medical centers. You have also the big box commercial labs. SDI Labs was the third lab in the country out of the 200,000 to achieve high complexity LDT, or laboratory developed test status. And we have started, we're primarily an RT-PCR lab. We built some very interesting analytics around our RT-PCR in terms of data intake. We're mapping out the 7 secondary infections that are most prevalent with a COVID positive patient. And we're also mapping out how those secondary infections impact high risk, chronic, and complex chronic subpopulations. So we're really a tech and data company that happens to surround a lab. The lab itself was stood up in 1987 by 2 molecular scientists out of UCLA doing Down syndrome research. A data scientist at Microsoft working under Bill Gates. Bill and Melinda Gates have been talking since the Ebola outbreak of the big pandemic coming, not a matter of if, but when. When the Down syndrome research was wrapping up with this particular molecular lab in Orange County, Ozma Hodin, who was a data scientist at Microsoft, purchased the lab. And kind of Oz, he's my CEO. I kind of refer to him as Noah, and SDI Labs being the Ark. He saw the need for a high complexity, high throughput RT-PCR lab in preparation for the next pandemic. So he was doing a lot of infectious disease work In the interim, COVID-19 hit. SDI Labs pivoted very quickly into building out its RT-PCR capabilities. They compress, there's 64 workflows involved in processing a molecular test, an RT-PCR. It compressed those 64 workflows down to 6. They've fully automated the process. It's 100% robotic. All of the software driving the robotics are cloud-based. So we are technically the largest RT-PCR lab in the country in terms of our capacity. We're able to process 50,000 RT-PCRs daily at a 99.9% accuracy rate. We also enjoy a global open source supply chain for reagents. Another patented process that SDI developed was the ability to take an existing reagent, a proprietary reagent. A lot of the commercial labs, a lot of these independent reference laboratories, they have, the usual suspects of lab equipment, Thermo Fisher, et cetera, and they all have proprietary reagents. We have a process where we can take any proprietary reagent and repurpose it for our special purpose built equipment. So we're pulling reagents from South Korea, from Israel, from Germany, from Australia. So we're not constrained by a closed proprietary reagent supply chain. We've also done some interesting innovations around media, which is the substance that you place the specimen in the tube, which basically kills the active virus but retains the molecular structure so it can be identified through an RT-PCR. We've done some pretty interesting innovations around media that basically extends the shelf life of a specimen before it goes bad. One of the problems with throughput with some of the bigger commercial labs is they had this reagent problem. They weren't able to keep up with the demand. So as the specimens were coming to the lab, they were spoiling because they didn't have an adequate media to retain the molecular structure while they were kind of stacking up in the back door because of the lack of reagents, which constrained the throughput. So we've solved for that problem. We can provide RT-PCR results within 24 to 48 hours electronically, and we're handling all of the reporting to all of the appropriate agencies that need to be in receipt of the outcome of the test. We can support any geography in the U.S. with no degradation of results. We're licensed in all 50 states. And with that, I'll take a breath, Walt.
Very well done, Ron, as usual. And for most everybody else, if you think you needed to be putting on your white lab coat to get through the discussion there, it takes us back to some earlier chemistry lessons, I think. But suffice it to say that Ron and the SDI team have figured out this integrated platform for testing and very, very high level accuracy testing and reporting that works well with their customer base. Ron, I tell you what, let's leave it at that for the moment and
Sure.
See if we can't pivot to the others, and then we'll circle back with some additional Q&A.
Totally.
Okay, next up is Paul Saltario, the co-founder of Opal. So,
all right, good afternoon. Thank you. This is, if there was ever a presentation that started with, and now for something entirely different, this may be it. And I appreciate the time to do this. Thank you. Again, my name is Paul Solitario, one of the co-founders of Opal. We're here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Next slide. Very simply, as complex as the last conversation was and brilliant, our technology is really based around safety, security, and operations of a workplace, meaning we have a wearable IoT technology that has the ability to track large numbers of people and or assets in large, complicated areas. And we can do it inside and outside. And the way we do it was with wearable devices. Here's an example of one that goes in a hard hat. And these devices batteries can last 3 to 5 years. If they're on a piece of equipment, they can last up to 10 years. And the idea is that the device is completely passive to the user, but at the same time, we get a massive amount of data that's not normally captured from the users or the equipment or whatever. And the data could be, again, on the operation side, but it can also very much be on the safety and security side. And the safety, we've focused a lot on COVID recently, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So if you can give me the next slides. Yeah, so how does it work? Next slide. Again, I talked about a wearable device. It starts out with a wearable device. It is patent pending, it's motion activated, and the device can take many forms. One is, as you saw earlier, it can be placed on a hard hat. So if you're using it in a construction area, or if you're using it in a dangerous area where hard hats are required, it can be done there. But it can also be part of an ID badge or a lanyard. So if it's a situation where folks are wearing ID badges, have to carry an ID, that's an ID badge holder. So the intent is we would slide your regular corporate ID in there, and then again, we would be able to track and monitor the individual. Or it could be part of an name tag, or it could be part of anything. We don't care about the form factor. The intent is, though, a form factor that the user doesn't have to think about. We don't want Walt to forget his device, so we're going to attach it to his hard hat, because he'll always have his hard hat on when he comes to the site, or he'll always need his corporate ID card to get into the building, or he'll always need his name tag if he's a server or whatever. So the idea is, don't make them think about anything else. I mean, we've all managed folks, and it's hard enough to get them to sign, clock in. And that's how they get paid, for goodness sake. And now we're asking them to wear something new or do something new. It's just not going to happen. So again, so the device is meant to be entirely passive. Next slide, please. And the way that those devices work is they're transmitting in a couple of frequencies, but the one that's key here is they're transmitting in a frequency called LoRa, which is a long range, low power frequency the devices can travel about half a kilometer. And the signal is picked up by these receivers we place around the site. These receivers are low voltage devices, so they're very easy to install. And also, what's key about these devices and the receivers is we're not Big Brother outside following folks around like your cell phone. We're not Google. This is the technology is meant to work with employees at their work zone, be it a hospital, be it an airport, be it a utility, be it whatever, construction site. We don't care what happens when they leave the site. That's not our business. Well, our business is we want to track you on site. We want to track the equipment on site. So the signal is only being picked up by these receivers. And we also have the ability, by the way, to do RFID. So we can do very, very close proximity. And so our technology can be used to manage gates and stuff. The next slide, please. And then what you do is you place the receivers around the site. So a key piece of our technology is we can do X, Y, and Z, meaning we can tell you where he is on the site, and we can tell you what floor they're on the site. And that's really critical in a safety situation. For example, I don't know if folks are aware of it, but during 9/11, when the first responders ran into the buildings, they knew they were in the building, but they didn't know what floor they were in the building. If we were there and we were people were handing out devices quickly to first responders at the security gate or whatever, you could tell where the person was on the floor, or where the maintenance guy is on the floor, or whatever. So we can track X, Y, and Z. And that's the intent here, inside and outside. Next slide, please. The way we work the data is picked up through dashboards. It's either our dashboard, which you can review through a web browser, any sort of web browser, be it your cell phone, iPad, computer. We also do reports. That reports can be sent to you as often as you want. It can be any kind of report you want, sort of who was on site, how many people were on site, specifically who was there. We can do if-then reports. If someone's in an unauthorized area, I want a text send to my phone. If somebody's unaccompanied, I want report on that. If we have crowding issues, I want to report on that. So it can be any kind of report. It can be an unlimited number of reports, and it can be done through email, through SMS, or whatever sort of format the client wants. We can also use our technology to interact with APIs to the customer's own dashboards, our own system. So that's key. So they don't have to start reading a new report. So if you say, listen, I've got my own EHS system, or I've got my own, can we transmit our data into yours? Absolutely. It just depends on the system how it's used. Next slide. Now, specifically for COVID, and this is really cool. That's an area we're spending an awful lot of time in right now, because our track technology has the ability to track, because the technology knows where people are, what's going on. We're using our technology coupled with thermographic imaging, which we're also selling right now, so that sites understand what's going on at their site. We can track where folks are, as we said earlier. We can help with contact tracing, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. And we can also track, and importantly, when we've got social distancing issues. Now, that's an interesting area of social distancing. We've tested a number of technologies to say, can our devices buzz if two guys get too close to each other or two workers get too close to each other? Or can we set off alarms or set off lights? We have done that. We have set it up that way. And quite frankly, it pisses people off. It pisses people off to have your device buzzing on your head or your arm or whatever. We are social animals. We just are. And the last thing we want to do is to have our workers, our team members turn off their device or take it off because they get pissed off that they spent 3 minutes talking to the guy about something. People get together. They stand next to each other. They get in line, whatever. So we've learned with social distancing, it's a lot more effective is to provide daily or hourly or weekly or however you want them reports to the appropriate people so they can manage. Hey, we have a problem in the morning with folks signing in. We're having a problem with people eating lunch. We're having a problem with too many people in the conference room meeting. Yes, we have to have conference rooms. Yes, there should be no more than 4 people in this large conference room. We're seeing where we have 8. And we can identify exactly what 8 people they are, but that allows the safety supervisors or the managers to use that data and then go speak to those people and say, hey, guys and gals, sorry, English is a terrible language for individuals. But, we need to manage it. So the reality is if you do it that way, you're going to have some effectiveness and you're treating people like adults. But if you have it where they're buzzing at them, and believe me, it's my company. We tested the system. It pissed me off. Okay. And we're trying to make it so it just doesn't work. But now the contact tracing is really cool. And so we can track, and if you could take the next slide, please. We can track where people have been. We can do algorithm, the amount of time you've been with somebody and how close you are. For those of you who haven't done a contact tracing drill recently, what they do is they say, okay, Walt, over the last 5 days, how many guys, who have you been in contact with? Write their names down and tell me where they were. Walt doesn't know what he had for breakfast this morning, And suddenly you're asking him, who was the guy behind him in the elevator for 3 minutes as they wanted to be? I don't know. Or if it's a construction site and you're working in a room, who were the 3 other guys from the other construction subcontractor that were with you? I barely know the guys on my team. And now you're asking me the names of the guys behind me? I have no clue. So with this report, we can prioritize and put in a list who were you with the longest and closest, and it goes all the way down. And then the company and the union or the medical staff or whatever can look at this data. And if you can see, it's done by numbers, their tag number, not their name, because it's all anonymized. The ID number, and say, listen, 71360 was in contact with all of these people in this amount of time. Hey, company, you decide who you want to contact. And how far down the line you want to go to say, hey, folks, 1, you were in proximity with somebody that came back that was tested positive, and 2, we should get you tested, or maybe you weren't there close enough, but you should isolate or you should look out, whatever. However the company wants to use the data, but for the first time, we're going to give you real data, accurate real data of the entire time these people were on site. And again, it can be visitors. You can have people who are using an ID badge just 1 day, however you want it. So we're suddenly give you very, very accurate data, but the social contact tracing for the individuals, and you don't have to guess it. Next slide, please. Another thing we can do, and this is critical, people don't think about this much until it actually is a problem, is where was that person? You have a big site, be it a big manufacturing site, you have a nuclear power station, whatever. Where was Walt? If right now what's happening is in a lot of sites, nuclear power plants, for example, they may have to shut the whole plant down because they have to clean it up because they're not going to let anybody else get back in there until they know it's scrubbed down. Well, if we can say with a straight face, no, I know exactly where he was these past 5 days. I can track him through the site. I can track him through the construction zone, whatever. It doesn't make sense to close the whole site because he wasn't anywhere near the north side and the west side or whatever. We just need to focus on these areas. We need to focus on these areas, especially where you spend a lot of time. Let's really scrub those down, and let's focus on that area. And that's a big difference. It's for the first time you get a lot more accuracy in your cleaning. You get a lot more accuracy in the cost of shutting the sites down, because we're going to do that, and tragically it's going to happen more and more. And that's what you're seeing here. We are working, a big contract of ours is Dominion Energy. They contracted us because they were doing turnarounds and shutdowns for their sites. And back in this past March, that their first site shut down for a normal turnaround. A couple of weeks into it, somebody tragically came down with COVID, and they kept the site power plant additionally closed down for another 60 days as they were trying to figure out how to clean it and do something. You all know in the industry, shutting down a power plant for 60 additional days is a disaster. It's massively expensive. So what we do is we say, no, wait a minute. We can tell you where he was. We can tell you what's going on, who was he with, and you keep that site going and just isolate that person in that area. And that's a key part of what we do. Next slide, please. So one of the things we do when we roll out technology, a key thing of our technology is it's terribly simple to install. You saw the devices earlier. They have no buttons. They have no on-off switch. They have no nothing. The idea is you put it on, you carry it wherever you're supposed to carry it, and you forget about it. And the receivers have no on-off switch, no nothing. They're PoE powered, power over an Ethernet. So you plug one end of the power line into your Ethernet plug. You power it into some power 110 cable, and then you can daisy chain the receivers, a ton of them, and it's PoE low voltage cable that anybody can install. You don't need to worry about the electrical union or anything. It's very simple to install, and you install it wherever you need it. So the idea is it's incredibly easy to manage. One of the things we have learned, though, is we're providing a whole new set of data for the client, a whole new set of safety data. We're providing a whole new set of operational data, a whole new set of security data. So we have to work with your teams to teach them how to use that data. Who's going to own the process? Who's going to hand out the devices? Who's going to register them? Who's going to make sure the system is up and running all the time? If it's a construction site, who's implementing it as the site continues to grow out? All that stuff. So we spend a lot of time up front working with the clients, so they know how to roll it out and how to manage the process, and not just here's a bunch of toys. This is not a TV. We're not just throwing you a bunch of cool little toys with an instruction box and knock yourselves out. We're saying here's a whole new way of doing business. And the fact of the matter is, for most of our businesses, we study and a bunch of IT specialists on the phone. You guys study a lot of stuff, but if you're not really studying, understanding management and understanding people, and if you're not measuring it, you can't affect it. And so what we're suddenly doing is now providing a whole new level of data for folks to be able to affect that issue. Industries we work in, as we talked about, we're working utilities extensively. We do an awful lot of work in construction. We do work in oil and gas refineries. That's a huge business for us. Our devices are about to be certified intrinsically safe. Right before COVID, we were about to install in an airport, and we were actually talking to Hartsfield Airport too about installing mining, and then of course large buildings. And we're just talking about installation today about installing in a hospital, medical office building to be able to track all the employees coming in and out. So our applications are all over the place. Lastly, is we're in the process of talking to utility. It's actually not a chemical, not like electrical utility. It's a cable company, but this can work on any sort of utility. Is we're going to be installing our receivers in the trucks, and so when the guys go out, the power lines, whatever, the cherry picker trucks, we'll be able to track the individual workers when they get out of the truck. The technology is well available for tracking the truck. That's fine. That's not what we're in. What we're doing is when Joe gets out of his truck and now works on the line, the fact is, how long has he worked? How many hours has he put in? Is he putting in too much overtime in a natural disaster area? Our devices have accelerometers in there, so we can measure a man down. Did he fall? Did he collapse? If you got a worker in the middle of nowhere working on his truck and he falls down or hurts himself or slumps down, or never that happens at any utilities we're talking to, but if he decides to take a nap on his truck, we can measure that. We can tell you the lack of activity, lack of movement. The guy showed up at the site and he hasn't moved for 45 minutes. Is that a concern because he passed out, or is that a concern because he's taking a snooze? And so that's a whole new level of data that we can provide clients. And when we do it by the guy wearing his ID badge, it's being picked up by the receiver in the truck, and then the truck's telecommunication system sends that back to the cloud. By the way, all of our data is stored at AWS, so it's not stored with us. It's not stored with you. We went with them because of the highest security we could have. So that's going to keep it there, keep it simple, and Walt will get to the end for questions.
Paul, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. As you can see, a little bit of method to the madness here. We had Ron and SDI looking at the worker before they got into the site, and now we've got the workforce at the sites, and Paul and his team are taking over to track and monitor their health and safety from that perspective. Paul, I've got a couple follow-up questions for you.
Yes, sir.
For sure, and we'll get back to that.
All right.
Okay, let's give the throttle to Mr. Ed White, Chairman and CEO of Field to Base. And again, Ed's got a platform that we're using with the workforce as their own work site.
Well, thank you. First off, Ron and Paul, those were great presentations. And I'll tell you, every discussions that I'm involved with, probably the most confusing things that people talk about are the types of tests that you can take, how you take them, not putting something up your nose, but how do you actually get a test that's meaningful? And then what does it really do for you? Because we're really trying to keep everybody safe at the end of the day. And the tracing part of it obviously is extremely important. Just real quick, I own a company called Field to Base in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we're very heavy involved in the utility industry, along with healthcare, construction, and many others about mobility. And we partnered with a company called Black & Veatch, which I'm sure most of you know Black & Veatch. They're an EPC company with about 10,000 plus professionals around the world. And they operate in about 120 offices, 5,000 job sites on any given day. And we really started out working with Black & Veatch to build a solution on Field to Base platform to manage getting their employees back to work. And it didn't take very long as we got into it that Black & Veatch had some of their clients were asking about what they were doing to start returning employees back to work. And Field to Base did as well. And so go to the next slide, if you will. And so what we wound up with was really not just a solution to return employees, but we started going back to really understand what's the medical implications of the pandemic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that before we get into what this technical solution is. And what we found is that there's a combination of digital and physical I'm going to talk a little bit about. And a lot of it has to do, how do you get your employees back to work safely? How do you take care of your coworkers? And how do you keep that company safe? And I like to use, you talk about power plants, and I've used the story many times between NC State and UNC Chapel Hill, which we all knew. They had a handful of fraternities that shut down two major universities that kept, 65,000 students at home for a semester. Think about the hundreds of millions of dollars of what that cost. And so even though we're focused primarily on the utility industry, they're in a single entity today that's not dealing with the pandemic and how you get your employees back. And that ranges from universities to getting people on airlines to getting people on cruise ships again. Next slide. And we started out really just between Black & Veatch and Field to Base. It didn't take very long that we realized that there's a huge medical component. We pulled in a couple of entities with us, especially very heavy in the healthcare world that understands the pandemic. They understand, they've been advising companies on what's the right protocol to bring their employees back to work safely. And we also talk a lot about the legal side of it there. What do you do with best practices to protect your company if you are dealing in a world of the pandemic? And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be mitigating that risk from the legal world as well as the regulatory world. And then the other part of it that we've done a lot of work with is the testing agencies as well. And so the solutions that we put together with Black & Veatch has to do with managing the protocols to bring employees back, but also integrated with testing, which we know testing is the solution that's there today. And the next thing we'll follow will be how we integrate in the vaccines that come into play for that population as well. Next slide. And I've touched a little bit on this. When we think about companies, I've used since we're dealing with utilities, I've made a number of presentations, and I've used the analogy of things like hurricanes. We deal with hurricanes all the time in the Southeast, and so it's almost like we're dealing with a hurricane when we're talking about this pandemic. And so part of it is that you've got to really think about what's your cost of decontamination, whether it's a power plant or an office, or is it the cost of lost work days? It's no different than power being out, if you will. The employee wellness is huge, obviously, because that's one that you do have to keep the employees safe, and you got to keep the coworkers safe. And then obviously the risk part of it is mitigating the legal exposure. And then I'll give you one real quick comment there. After Hurricane Sandy, one of our customers we do a lot of work with is National Grid, and we're talking about the cost of doing restoration of power. And a VP there told me, he said, well, the problem was they got an $18.5 million fine for their perceived delay in responding to Hurricane Sandy. Well, if you think about how people are responding to this pandemic, you got to almost put your hat on and dealing with things like hurricanes and catastrophic events But that's the type of liability that's facing utilities and other companies today. Next slide. Working with Black & Veatch, we really separated out into a digital and a physical solution. I'm going to touch just briefly on the physical part that Black & Veatch has done, and then I'm going to really talk about the digital part. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what that is. Black & Veatch has built a solution called RAMS, which is a mobile health system. They started out working with some hospitals in Kansas City. They've deployed it at a number of places like Smithfield Foods for food production. There's a number of hospitals, a number of schools. And what RAMS does, it's a mobile solution where you can do testing and screening without putting a tent up. And as you know, as we're getting into the winter months, it's very difficult to do high-speed screening and testing if you have to put a tent up in the morning and take it down in the evening. And then you got the issue of putting your stuff away. But now that we're getting really into the testing, the ability to do rapid testing and so forth, and the testing analyzers can be stored in those units as well. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the RAMs, but that is a very key part of the solution on how companies are managing their employees coming back in. The other part of it is from the way Black & Veatch looked at it, they wanted their employees screened before they walked into the lobby. And if you go to Overland Park, their corporate headquarters, with 5,000 employees, they don't want 500 people walking into the lobby, and 2 of them have been infected and they potentially infect a lot of other people. So the idea of RAMS is you clear everyone before they actually can get into the lobby or into whatever that facility happens to be. Next slide. The solution that I'm going to talk about, we branded as Cooperate. We developed it with Black & Veatch, again, around the idea of managing their employees first. And it's a digital solution that runs on mobile devices. And as we go through it, you'll see that we incorporate protocols that range from decorations, primarily based on CDC guidelines. But we also see those guidelines varying very much by state. And especially if you go to New York or Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and others, they're looking at things a little bit differently from state to state, but also local jurisdictions and local companies are. And so we have the ability to implement those protocols. And it's a combination of those protocols integrated with testing is what we're doing to try to clear as many people medically to go back into work or to go to school or to go to an event as we can. Next slide. There's 3 major components to the platform. And again, all these run on mobile devices. The first one is an app that we just called the Boarding Pass Manager, if you will. And you're going to hear me talk about a boarding pass, which is a concept we built this around. And what that does is that lets every user registers, they download that app from the App Store, and then they start their decorations, which they typically do daily. If they get tested, we pick up those test results with integration into the testing labs. And then based on what they've submitted, then we can either give them a pass back that means they're cleared medically to go to work, or it requires some additional screening because it could be they're symptomatic or they tested positive. They're going to stay at home until they get cleared with another test that, they're past that point of being infected. The middle app is the Access app. And what we did with that is that we built a number of solutions to get people in and out of facilities. One solution is where you scan the boarding passes as you go into a facility, just like you would scan a boarding pass getting into an airplane. You may validate PPE, may check temperature. You check that employee in, and when they leave at the end of the day, you check them out with a quick barcode scan. And that works great where you've got larger offices and so forth. There's a number of others that we had to deal with. We have to deal with visitors. Talking to Duke Energy, the first thing they said was we have employees who either don't have smartphones or don't have emails, or they don't admit to it anyway. And so you have to have the ability to handle employees that do not have smartphones, don't have emails, and obviously you got to handle visitors. And so we build a number of solutions that range from kiosk mode to self-check-in, so we can let people check in at a variety of locations, going in and out of facilities, and then we check them out. Different from what Paul was talking about, we do not trace throughout the day where employees are. We know where they check into a location or a facility. We know when they check out. And then in the event that there is someone comes in infected, then we know where that person has been throughout the course of the past week or whatever time frame. We also have the ability to immediately identify everyone else who was in that location at that point in time. Then that gets integrated in with testing, so we can notify that entire population that get tested. send the test request to the testing agencies to move that quickly. And then we have a platform that we use to manage a workflow portal that I'll talk a little bit about on how we do the automation part of it. It's also where we keep track and trace where people have been throughout the course of a period of time. Next slide. Kind of walk you through what it looks like. The boarding pass, again, is we've all been on airplanes before. And so once we get that boarding pass, it's a pretty intelligent boarding pass. The statuses range from approved. That means that your conditions that you declared, you're totally asymptomatic. You've not tested, or you don't have temperature or any of those things. So we can clear you medically to go to work, if you will. A couple others I'll just touch on. One of them could be that you're denied access. If you have a number of conditions, it could be you traveled out of the country and you have a temperature. We use a scoring on each of those conditions that the employer sets as what they use to trigger not clearing someone automatically to go into work. And then once that happens and they've got to get tested, and once that clears, then they can get another boarding pass back that clears them to go to work, if you will. Another one that we do is called submission pending, and then you may have conditions such as a temperature, or you may have traveled, and so you don't get an automatic boarding pass, but it goes to a workflow portal, and then a doctor or someone that's designated can call and review with that individual what their conditions are. They may clear them medically, but they may require them to go get tested before they get cleared to go to work. And then the last one on the boarding pass, we call it stay at home. And we know that many companies like Black & Veatch are limiting the number of people that can go back into an office or a work location. So if you can only bring 20% of your employees back, you need to manage that. So you may be required to stay at home because your capacity limitations, or you have employees who have underlying conditions like diabetes, or they are taking treatment for cancer, forth. You don't want those around the population to get infected. And so we use that as to manage that stay at home. And then if you look over on the mobile device for the boarding pass itself, we validate by requiring a self-photo. We validate the location with GPS coordinates, time and date stamps, signatures, barcode to scan to get them in and out quickly. And it's kind of hard to read, but the boarding pass itself has the date it was issued, when it expires, hours and minutes remaining on it, and then you typically will renew that boarding pass every day. Because you got to remember, you could be tested this morning, you go out to dinner tonight, and you get exposed to some people that could either be infected or potentially be infected. Your conditions just changed immediately. And that's the reason most companies today that we're working with are requiring their employees to update their status every day. And that, again, fully integrated with testing and temperature, kind of gives you a holistic approach as to how you want to clear people. Next slide. Just kind of walk you through the process. Again, the first thing that we enroll all the employees, and we built the solution to handle anywhere, you could have as few as a few hundred employees to 50,000, 100,000 or more, because we're dealing with some very large companies, we're dealing with some very large universities, and so forth. And so to do that, you download the app. We register the employees on our servers. They go to the app store of their choice, they download the app, and they start their initial registration. If they have been tested, we're building full integration into companies like LabCorp, Mako Medical, Inspire, and others to pick up those test results immediately. And part of the reason for getting the integration with the testing labs is that if someone's infected, you want to be able to isolate them immediately, but by the same token, if they're cleared, you want them going back to work as fast as you can, so you don't wind up with lost days or workman's comp claims, because you're waiting 2 or 3 days to find out what's happened there. So once they submit that, then we generate a boarding pass that comes back, and then the process repeats day after day with that. Next slide. A key that makes this work is something called workflow. And workflow is part of Field-Based, which was really built around the idea of editing and approving forms that get submitted to the field. And what workflow does, it allows a submission to be graded, and then based on the conditions and testing, we can automatically generate a boarding pass that's green, if you will, to go back to clear that employee, or they could be identified to require additional screening or a follow-up with a doctor. But workflow is how we can handle thousands and thousands of employees in a very short period of time to manage that back to work or back to school process, if you will. Next slide. Location access, I touched on. This is absolutely key. Multiple ways of checking people in and out of locations. And again, it could be as complex as validating PPE and checking temperature, which we pick up, to just strictly a kiosk where we want to scan their boarding pass, check them in, check them out. And then it's very quick and easy to do for simplicity, but at least now we know where they've been, who's been in that location with them in case we need to go back and do location level tracing. Next slide, please. And I think this is probably the last slide is data analytics. And with the analytics, we immediately know who's on a job site. And so this is uploaded as soon as they check in. So managers or supervisors through any browser with any mobile device or any computer has got immediate access to see who checked in and then who's checked out. And then we do a lot of work around the conditions. So we know who's showing conditions such as temperature, who's been tested with antibodies. And this is also the place that we'll really trace the number of people who've been vaccinated. I think it's going to be very important to manage that subpopulation as they get vaccinated, and they'll be treated probably differently for some number of months than the ones who have not been vaccinated or the ones who are showing antibodies present. And next slide, I think that's probably the last slide, if you will. Next slide. And that is it. And I'll be glad to take questions once we finish up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Very, very well done. You know, if it hasn't dawned on everybody yet, we've just heard from 3 separate businesses that have all attacked this COVID pandemic and have developed solutions that you can see have some parity, have some overlap, and have some distinguishing features between them. And it's just it's really interesting to see and it hasn't even been a year that these kinds of things have been developed and deployed. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Ed. Okay, well, let's give our final panelists an opportunity to speak as well. David Martineau, who's the Deputy CEO and Energy Global Practice Head at SIA Partners. So, David, you're on.
Hello, good evening. I should say good afternoon, I don't know, but I'm based in Paris, so it's 8 p.m., so I should say good evening. Thanks for having me tonight. So, you will see in my presentation, I have an full French accent. You will see it's, I cannot, sorry, it's like that. You will have to support me for a couple of minutes to support this accent. You will see in my presentation that, yeah, I agree with you. We do have all built very quite of different things, but there is a lot of overlap, a lot of ways to access this kind of same problem, which is the one of the COVID. And of course, maybe if we join everything in one single product, we'll have a pure thing that will be very brilliant. But maybe nobody has that time to do it so wide and so much things. So I'll give you a couple of things about what we have done with SIA Partners. So if you go on the next slide. A couple of words just before about SIA, because SIA Partners is not a software company. We are a consulting firm. So you should say, what are you doing there? Where are you proposing anything? And what are you doing there? Yeah, on my side, so I am the head of the energy and utility sectors. I'm a smart metering expert. Okay, it has nothing to do with the COVID. I'm also the head of the AI practice within SIA Partners. So for us, we are 1,800 people here at SIA Partners, and it's about 400 in the energy and utility sectors and 100 in the AI practice. And we are quite always doubling depending on if you take the full company every 3 years, the AI part every year, whatever you want. I'm not here to speak too much about the energy utilities things, even if in fact we have applied our solution to these sectors. What I could say is based on the next slide. We have been during the COVID. Oh, sorry, there is something you could not see on the right. See, my slide is not having the. Normally, you should be seeing something on the right, but I don't know why there is no. There is this big triangle. It should not be there. It should not be there. It wasn't there in my PPT version. I don't know. Yeah. Come back, please, on the previous slide. I would just explain what is behind. Just on the previous one, please. Yeah. Okay. So back in the beginning of 2020, so we have been starting the with the COVID and the lockdown in March in France, like in every country around the world, of course. And at this time, we have had a lot of customers that were calling us to do our normal business consulting work, which is the one of how can I restart, how can I reboot, what can I do, how can I put on all my activity to do our activity of trying to solve problems and helping as a consultant our customers to do something different in a different context. One of our customer was a bit different. It was the French government, and these people called us and say, "Okay, we have seen that you are doing a couple of things together with digital and AI. We are creating a small workforce to try to tackle the issue of the contact tracing. And can you do something in this area?" So at this moment, you have to remember, beginning of March 2020, we were having not so much digital response to the COVID in terms of things like contact tracing, except in China and in a couple of Asian countries where definitely the people were having like let's say like you were explaining like boarding pass and so on, but not to go to the companies, to go everywhere and so on. And it was seen in Europe like something crazy. Oh, we have to put a policeman behind every people and know where they are, what they are doing, forbid them to go everywhere. It will never work in France, but we have to try to find something, a digital way to be prepared for the end of the lockdown. Um, at this moment, so we have been on our side saying, okay, we need to build something. Maybe we need to build some app. We need to build a smartphone app that will help the people understand if they have been in the close contact with people that are COVID positive. Everything that everyone knows right now, how we say all these ideas of contact tracing app is now well known, but in beginning of March it was not the case, definitely. In beginning of March also, it was not we were not having Google and Apple having trying to create some cooperation to build some Bluetooth things and so on. It was definitely 3 months before. So at this moment, we have been saying, okay, we on SIA partners and a couple of partners, we are going to try to build something for the government, to build a contact tracing app. We need something to be ready for the end of the lockdown. We were on the 16th of March, and we have said, okay, in the 20th of April, we will deliver to you, French government, something free of charge, which is a contact tracing app ready to be scaled to 60 million people. So we have been doing that. This is what you see on the left, and this you see the left of the slide. So we see this was a prototype of what we call Stop C19, which is a prototype of the app that has been deployed at the end by the French government. At this moment, we as SIA partners were here for three things. First of all, we were consulting companies who were capable to understand the need of some things and to make the framing of such an app and such all the system that is behind. We were having a digital agency, and we were capable to make UX and UI on all the apps to make it very, I say, user friendly and make have the people and the citizen use it. And furthermore, we were good at telecom and AI, and this was not in my bio, but I have started my career in the telecom things and so on. So I was quite before the energy things. I was doing some telecom things and so on. So I was here for about the Bluetooth things and the way we collect with the data we have collected for the Bluetooth things, how we can use AI to understand what is a true contact and not so true contact, and what is the risky contact and what is not a risky contact, and so on, and keeping it with privacy by design. So it was a crazy thing. We said to build that from nowhere. We were not having not so much example of how to do that. We were knowing that in Singapore, in Hong Kong, and so on, it has been working not so much. Especially, it was quite well working on the Android smartphone, but not at all on iPhones. A couple of things like that, and we were having just the white page and so on. It was a bit difficult. So we have been building a 70 people team. We have been working days and nights during 1 month delivering in that. And after 1 month, we have delivered on the 20th of April. We have delivered a fully functional prototype ready to scale on the server and cloud, ready for health data management and so on. All deliver all the system for the French government. That's the first part of the story. They have taken just the radio algorithm of that, and they have created something else with it. This is French way of doing it, the things. So they have taken the radio thing, the Bluetooth port, put it in the module, keep a couple of ideas, and say, okay, you will see. People do not need anything about your UX and UI things. You just need to have the app activated on their phone, and of course they will use it. Of course, it has not been the case. Definitely, if it has not been the case, between 1 and 2 million people have been downloading it. They were expecting 40 million, so it was a nightmare for them. But it was a very interesting app. You just switch it on. It never gives you any information except one day. Just get an alert. You have been closing. You have been seeing someone COVID positive. Oh, which is not that's a good news. And if you do not receive anything, you do not know if there was or not contact, or if the app is not working. So they have changed everything in October this year, and they have been back to taking all our UX from the very first app of April, and now it's they have already 10 million downloads. So that it was a good idea. That's the introduction. During this campaign of this 1 month, we have been speaking with a lot of people, municipalities, political people, health companies, medical staff, and so on and so on, everywhere, because we were preparing the launch of such an app, and we were trying to have a lot of ambassadors, a lot of companies that want to promote the usage of this contact tracing app. Of course, it was useless since they don't use our app at this time, but one conclusion was very interesting. Everyone was saying, but, oh, okay, I understand. You are building this for the government towards its citizen, but I have a company. How can I use this app, the contract tracing app for the government? I can use it to help my employees to go back to work and back and safe. This is where it's coming in the word of the app, which is should display on the right, which is where back and safe, but you cannot see it since there is this gray triangle on the right. And we have said to them, it's very simple. You cannot use it. You cannot use it. It's privacy by design. We do not know anything about anything. All the algorithm is mostly done on the edge in the smartphones. Even on the server data, there is only a couple of temporary items, not so much, and the matching of the different IDs is not done on the servers; it's done on the smartphone. Nobody knows who has been in contact with who. Nobody knows how many contacts there has been, and so on. It was not a good answer, of course, for them, saying, "Oh, yeah, that means we are not capable to do anything." And you have said, "Okay, maybe there's another thing to do, as we still have our 70 people team working and have been just finishing the government app. Maybe we can build something else." So we have been starting from a framework we have been creating for the Stop C19, something that was definitely very scalable, very privacy by design, very anonymous. And we have been saying, okay, just suppose we use it and we deploy it at the context of a company. Could we add a couple of things, like I would say some tags in the database, and make a couple of processes to be, I would say, not so much anonymous, and so that we can manage and work with employees. So this is what you have done. If you go on the next slide, yeah, we have done two things. First of all, we have said, okay, we were having, and the main point of our system was an app. Let's use what we have done and create a new app. This app will be very different from the one we have done for the contact tracing for government. First of all, you will have to log in with your username and so on. In the contact tracing for government, nothing, no ID, no phone number, no email, nothing. We do not know who is using what. In the company level, it's not so much useful. We do not know. You cannot, for example, give access, as you were saying just before. We cannot give access to somebody with Ghost. So we will be logging in, and we will be creating a couple of and allow you to do a couple of things. So the first thing is the capability to get a dashboard with a lot of information. This information could be related to global COVID in the and COVID in the state. It could be the one in the company. It could be also, and it's very useful to push a couple of downlink information just globally to a team or site, a global site. Most of the systems we do have today do not tackle a specific site or so on. They are just going through HR systems that are having the departments but not the site. So here we can just give an information saying, okay, oh, we have to close the second floor since, for example, there have been contacts and need to clean up since COVID. Things like that. We have included a chatbot. It is, of course, it has to be reparametered for every usage, every customer, so that we can answer any question about the procedures and about the things how do we manage the COVID within our companies. And a lot of information about you as a user of the application. For example, we do have inside the app your planning. That is, the planning is not the meetings you do have, but the days where you will be working from home and the days you will be on site, the days you will be off, and so on. So it's something which is a little bit different as the one we have normally with normal system. A lot of system you do have in companies, you can request for a leave. And here we do think that thanks to COVID, not because of COVID, there will be a lot of change, and it will be called more flexible and more flex office. We could add called it back and flex, and better than back and safe. I don't know, but it's something where we do say, okay, the people will be working from home certain days, and we will have to make sure that these people, when they are working from home, we know it. And if they want to change something, and for example, be on site one day because they have a meeting that should be on site and so on, they have to request for something which is an on-site presence anticipation. So there is a workflow over there, so that of course you can request to be there, which day, which date, that hour, for that purpose. We will be able to check the global capacity of the building at this moment. If, for example, you are the building or the floor of the room, whatever you want. If too many people have requested to be on site the same day and you have limited the capacity of the building to 20% of its global one, you will not be able to access to this request since it has been overloading the global capacity of the building. This is just for the planning. Of course, we need to do something which is more real time. If you are a simple user, what means about real time? Real time means two things. Give the information, and we will see that after that on the page after, but not for the moment. We will see that, of course, it's giving information to the site manager. Of course, I do also need a couple of things. I need to know if I want to make a presence request for tomorrow. I need to know what is the planned capacity of tomorrow. I'm going to be in the office, but is it something someday where everybody will be there? And finally, it's I don't want to meet so many people. I don't feeling so much safe with that. I will make a present for another day. And even sometimes in the real time, you want just to go downstairs to the canteen. You don't just for having lunch. Just have to check how many people are there or today compared to the capacity. And should I go now or wait for a couple of minutes? I will be able to do that. How do we do it? It's very easy to do. We have different ways of tracking the people who are on site. The first one is that we should just when we define buildings and floors and rooms in the app, we can print a couple of QR codes and just to flash this QR code through the app. That's like a checkout to make sure that you are entering or getting out from a room. And we can also use some Bluetooth beacons. So the Bluetooth beacons is very simple. It's just a small device you just put on the wall, just stick it on the wall, just working with a battery. It's something that will be, each time you will be in the area to where the Bluetooth things, it will be detected by your smartphone, and this smartphone will then send a couple of information saying how many people are close from this Bluetooth system. It's working very well. We have been putting that in a couple of locations, and it could be from some premises, from rooms to warehouses. It's always working well. So this real-time information will be very helpful. It could also give you a couple of capabilities, like just booking a room. You are just in front of the room. You can just flash the QR code in front of the room, and then it will book it for you for a couple of minutes, for a couple of let's say half an hour or 1 hour. And then nobody will be able to book it to be present at the same moment. It could be used for rooms, for your seat or your location on some decks or some open space, whatever you want. We have, of course, added a couple of functionalities that are coming from the tracing and the contact tracing features. On the right, this is coming in overlap with a couple of discussions we have had before. Of course, one of the problems with the contact tracing is if you do not give any feedback to the people with the contact tracing, they will be a little bit lost with that. They will just think that you are chasing them, and you are, in fact, they don't know if they are what you'll be used for that. So here we just have a monitor, which is every day at the end of the day. So we don't want to do something so much read time and so on. We just give you the number of close interaction you have had. That means the number of cases where you could have been, I would say, infected by COVID, in case the opposite people would have been COVID positive. For the moment, you do not know anything except that you have had 6, 7, 8, 10 close interaction in this day, and you can monitor how you are making social distancing. And of course, you do not respect so much the lockdown, you go everywhere and so on. It will be interesting. It was a pure feature and very interesting, according to me, in terms of contact tracing at government level for global country. It's something which is, of course, in the company level, it's very different, since, of course, it's only working with the people that do have the same app as you. That means always your employees and always your colleagues. If you are going in the subway, of course, you will not see your social interaction with that app, which is one of the limitation of this one. This is why also we put it as an optional thing. And also because a couple of companies around the world do not like so much the contact tracing, and they do prefer something which is just about office location and office management. You have on the right of the slide something which is also very simple, which is a moon meter. A moon meter is just we cannot we have, of course, in the app a system that enables if you have activated the contact tracing, enables the colleagues that are volunteer to say, okay, I have been COVID positive, just forward the fact that I have been COVID positive anonymously to the colleagues I have been encountering during the last 14 days. Something which is inherited from our contact tracing app, of course. This is based on the volunteer access, and we cannot force the people to say I have been COVID positive and so on. And we can make some different settings in the app with different setup. If you want just to alert your colleague, and you also that the HR department is aware that somebody, but you don't know when, and where, and who has been COVID positive and closely seeing a couple of other people. This is one of the features, but this second and more simple one could be like the moon meter, which is very simple. It's just to ask every day to your employees how you're going today, and I'm doing well, and you have several level of that, and thanks to that, you can also monitor the mood of the people. Mood, it could be also symptoms of COVID, but just also their mood to see if there are some impacts of lockdowns, of situation with a couple of crises or whatever you want. If you go to the next slide, and then I finished with that one. Of course, we do have the back office of this one. All right, this is kind of just an app which is working without any back office. The back office is more for site managers, operational manager, HR department. With this one, of course, there is dashboard per site, so you can see in real time the occupancy of the site, the occupancy of the floor. You can parameter some alerts and so on if you have an over capacity and things like that. You will have to manage your buildings and your team within the app so that it could be working. So there are some features for importing or exporting coming from HR or facility management system, but you can also make the parameter settings within the app. And there are a couple of features, of course, that will be only in this app, like the beacons, Bluetooth beacons management, or like the QR code generation. And of course, you will have a couple of features for the operational managers. And for example, these people will have to validate the fact that you will be coming on site or not, and so on. But they have also to understand what is their team doing. It's very good with the flex office. You can have the HR department defining that everyone should be 2 days per week on site. But if you are a manager and you don't know who is going to go when, you cannot manage your team anymore. So you have to make sure and that you have an overview of all the people in your team, knowing when they will be off site, when they will be on site, when they will be requesting to be present for such a meeting and so on. And this could be, of course, combined with agenda calendar tools like Outlook and so on. And that's globally what we have done within this Bucket Safe feature. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And I know it's getting late in France there, but we appreciate you participating and making this truly a global seminar. Listen, since I've got you on the floor, I've got a question for you. And now for everybody's benefit, we'll go into the opening of the Q&A dialogue. And we've got about 30 minutes, a little less than that, left in the session today. So I think we got plenty of time to address some questions. But David, I mean, you've mentioned that SIA is essentially a consulting practice. And when you talk about the COVID, there are a number of targeted areas I suspect that you've got. And three of those were incident crisis management, people and resource planning, which you talked about a little bit just there, and then financial and risk management. Can you walk us through how you engage with a typical customer? I know you're dealing with the French government is quite a customer, but go through that process. And do they use all of the suite of your services, or do you find that most of your customers are using two or three? David, you're muted. Got to unmute.
It's better than that.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, of course, all our customers do not use the same kind of services, and they do not are facing the same difficulties at the same time. And they do not need also all the time support from consultants. You know, there are a couple of companies that the first thing they do in this kind of crisis, oh, where are the consultants? Just fire them. We'll get a couple of money back. so you have, of course, to deal with that kind of issues. No, definitely we have had several kind of things. We have companies that, and it's a lot depending on the sectors and the way they have been facing this crisis. We were having a couple of consultants working previously before the lockdown and so on for airline companies, for some companies in the, let's say the Fork, for example, with the Fork, all restaurants are closed. They don't have money anymore. Their problem is not to do anything except just focusing on the cash management. So they will go on risk management, cash management, and they will ask us for people just working on this thing and not target at this moment, not seeing how they can restart or reboot. A couple of other companies have been asking us how we have to adapt our activity and how can we restart it. And a couple of others have had several stages. Look in the energy and utilities sectors, which is the one we do like over there in this room. In this one, let's focus on March, April, something at the beginning of the lockdowns everywhere in the world. Their first thing was, how do we go on with the activity? We should not stop anything. Of course, if our companies are not resilient, the country will explode. We should have gas, power, water, whatever you want, and it should be going on. So during the first month, March, April, June, nothing except continuation of the activity and a couple of issues about cybersecurity. And definitely, we have had a number of issues to work with our cyber team since there were a lot of attacks and a lot of failures when everybody was trying to connect remotely with the VPN of the company. It was not designed for that. So, of course, of a lot of overloads in a lot of countries, in a lot of companies. And we have been especially working on that continuation of the activity, make sure the people will be able to work remotely from their home. A couple of weeks later, of course, they were just counting the money they were losing because there was not consumption anymore. For the let's give a couple of examples, but if you look in the energy sector like gas and power, of course, the power you have not consumed in the March will have not been back in April. a little bit in the industrial world, but not so much for the domestic users. Of course, they will not start to switch on the light every day since it's no more lockdown. So with this company, we have had something which was once again, how do we deal with that? And especially the one that have a regulated world, how are we going to face a new budget for the end of the year, knowing the fact that we have now lost a couple of money you will never get back. There have been a lot of also very different issues. Let's stick again to the energy and utility sector. Give you one example of utility, which DSO, sorry, so grid distributor, somewhere in the UK. So these people were having, as everyone, lockdown in the country, consumption that was very low due to limited industrial, professional, and consumer energy, and a lot of wind farms and solar panels. In March, in the north of UK, there is not so much solar, wind, not so much sun, but there's a lot of wind. And so one of the things we have been tackling with my team here is how do we have too much wind, too much energy injected in the grid, very low consumption. So if we do not do anything, there will be a huge issue in the grid since the voltage will be changing. So we cannot have that. So we have to stop and cut the access to the network to a couple of wind farms. But where and when? So at this moment, we have something very different from just the money back. We have been asked, can you please help us to understand with AI techniques, weather forecast techniques, and so on, how, where, and when can we disconnect a couple of wind farms so that there is no issue in the grid? So you see, it was very so many examples, so many things we have been doing. And finally, we have had a lot of work, even during the lockdown, for all of that.
Thank you, David. Yeah, there are a number of aspects to this, and to the other panelists, looking at it from a business perspective, you've developed products and services that are ready and have been deployed to help in this situation. But you got to get to the right decision makers. So that's most companies have some kind of a crisis management or risk management committee that's been established to look at the business. How are you penetrating those risk or crisis management committees? And then how are you getting your product and services into the decision maker's hands so that it actually use them, pull the trigger, as opposed to just being paralyzed by the number of platforms that are out there? And then how do we make the best decision for the particular business customer that you're looking at? And let's go to you, if you could take that one, and then I'll pulse the other two.
Be glad to. It's interesting because most companies, and I'm just talking about small companies, but the large ones, talk about major utilities, major manufacturers, and so forth. Most of them have a COVID-19 response team that's made up of senior management. But what we're finding, the two key players are human resources and health and safety. And if you think about health and safety, before it had to do with the physical safety of making sure that you had protective equipment like goggles and electricity or boots and those type of things. And what we're really seeing right now is this part is overlaying health that will become part of the culture going forward. And I think you'll probably see a chief safety officer as here today. Because human resources is, how do you put together protocols that require your employees to get tested? How do you get them to declare things? A lot of companies require drug testing, and the enforcement comes down to either do it or you don't work here anymore. So, but again, HR has a lot to do with it. And I was really just talking about the impact of health and the role HR did with the city and but you never part of the discussion, but they are.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'll add a little postscript to that. And I'm going to speak very candidly, very candidly. So forgive me if there's anybody on the call that I'm stepping on your toes. I'm sorry, but I'm just in the spirit of answering the question. I'm seeing a bit of a conflict emerge between occupational and non-occupational, between risk management and HR as it relates to funding. In some situations, not all. But there's a lot of converging issues here: regulatory, operational, and financial. And I think on the financial front, I'm seeing a shift. Even though there might be scenarios where the occupational camp is kind of developing the protocols, I see this migrating financially to the self-insured ERISA health plan for a variety of reasons that we can go into or not. But in terms of the bucket funding, the testing, I see more often than not a shift going towards the self-insured ERISA health plan. I think a lot of that has to do with maybe mitigating employer liability and also potentially trying to avoid the experience mod component of your work comp spend versus a self-insured ERISA health plan spend. So for what it's worth.
So Ron, following up on that, are you seeing the insurance provider stepping in this case? Because we do have a question on cost that we need to get to, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I mean, clearly we've got a plethora of applications here. And most businesses could use some or all of what's been produced today. But then the next question is, what is the cost? And recognizing most businesses have revenue impact streams, they've had rotational employee layoffs and furloughs, and where's the money coming from? What do we need to absolutely have to get done versus what can we afford? So as it pertains to the funding source, you say that insurance companies are thinking about stepping in. Is that happening?
That's actually, forgive me, Walt, but that's not what I'm saying, because it's not the insurance companies. It's the operating committee that manages a self-insured ERISA health plan.
So it's the company self-insured program. Gotcha.
That's correct. That's correct. And you basically have, with a work comp context, you've got an experience modification factor you've got to navigate that you don't necessarily have in your self-insured ERISA health plan. And I do see a tendency to kind of move the cost in that direction, because ERISA affords you the ability to make those adjustments, and as opposed to a fully insured context where there is a little bit of a hesitation, as you will, if you will, as it relates to the commercial insurers, the commercial payers, really around medical necessity. And this gets a little complex, but it also has to do with if the company is receiving funding. So there's some funding sources that require COVID-19 as the primary diagnosis code, where, and this is primarily in a provider context, where if you might have situations where, let's say that you have an employee that's going into sepsis, where sepsis is the primary diagnosis code. It gets kind of complex, but if you step back a moment, I'm seeing a trend of funding going towards the ERISA self-insured health plan as opposed to a work comp occupational bucket for funding.
Okay, so one last quick question, and we'll pivot to Paul and Ed and David. But recognizing that everything comes with a cost, and we've talked about various testing models, from just a temperature test, which is a thermometer as a worker comes by a station, up to and including your full-blown molecular test, which has got to be administered by a professional, or at least supervised, and it's sent to the lab and then results. How does a company make the decision on which one they use?
Yeah, that is an exceedingly unfair question for me to answer in a condensed period of time.
I knew that was going to be a challenge. You got 30 seconds, go.
I can answer it, but I'm going to need more than 30 seconds. I'm just going to go. I'm going to put my sales hat on here unapologetically. We have developed a protocol. We've developed. We have a patented process. What we can do is we can take an antigen test, which has a sensitivity issue. It's prone to false negatives. We can identify. We have a unique set of algorithms that we can identify the subset population that will be more prone to generating false negatives. We can confirm that subset with an RT-PCR. So basically, we can do a universal, very accurate testing using antigen test and confirming those false negatives that our algorithms are telling us are most prevalent with an RT-PCR, and obviously confirming the positives as well. One quick point about temperature checks, that misses asymptomatics, so there's a risk there. Also on digital passporting, we had to drop back from that. I would like to circle back with Ed on this because I think that there's a need to digitally mark a digital passport because the antibodies, it's empirically, we have good solid evidence to show that the antibodies start to wear off between month 2 and 3. So we can, I think any kind of digital passporting philosophy or technology needs to incorporate that component into itself. Otherwise, you run the risk of affirming that somebody is cleared for entry when their antibodies are actually starting to diminish. So just another complex, complicating factor.
I've got two other topics to be thinking about, and we'll try to get around the panel to discuss. One of them is technology is great, but in order to make any of this work, it's got to be integrated within the process of the individual company that's using that platform. So let's talk about a little bit of that, and I'll go to Paul first. That's the first one, but then the second question really goes to flexibility, and I think as we've seen, it's very challenging to get one size fits all for everybody, and I think that that the flexibility that I'm hearing in your platforms allows the business to designate those high critical areas, maybe put more money and more robust testing or traceability for that population, whereas in another segment it might not be so much. So it's bringing the commercial aspects into play of that flexibility. So think about that for a minute, but let's go back to the process and how you're best integrating and working with your customers to designate the platform owners and the process changes that are required to make that work. So, Paul, if you're still, well, I tell you, yeah, Paul, sure. If you're still with us, let's go with you.
Sure. I'm going to change the question slightly. I heard you, but we discovered in a slightly different way of looking at it that there are really almost 3 buyers, and I'm going to implementers, buyers, however you want to call it. And we found this pretty much across the board. There are 3 buyers. One is the purchasing agent. You can call them whoever you want. It could be the CEO, which we've had that conversation, purchasing department, that's fine, whatever. They're the ones who are going to come in, and they're going to be the analytical ones. They're going to be the ones who think that something should work. They studied in the boardroom, whatever the answer is, and they're going to go purchase that thing. It should work, and be it a buzzing hard hat thing or something. And this is a great idea, and we're going to buy that. So that's our first customer. The second customer is, quite frankly, the user, the end user. And that's not inconsequential, because all this technology we're talking about here is great stuff. But if you don't have close to 100% use and appliance, you're almost wasting your time. Okay, so if you're not either stopping every person, or every person doesn't have a passport, every person not participating, or every person has kept the apps running, or every person doesn't have a sticker on, or whatever the case may be, you've almost wasted your time. Yes, you can get some information about where people are, but if I've got 20% of my team walking around and they're not playing, whoever they are, it's been a waste. So the second buyer is the end user. Are you going to get them to play? however that's defined. And I can promise you, bullying them does not work. So you have to have something else. Now, one way you can bully them is simply you've got to leave the site, which is fine, but people will cheat if they can. So how can you work around it? And then the third user, and this is not inconsequential, is the site supervisor. And they're also many times the buyer, the local buyer, the guy who's going to have to, it's coming out of his profitability center. It's coming out of his day. He's been running his site, whatever it's a building, whether it's a power plant, whether it's whatever, you fill in the blank. He's been running it, or she's been running it for 25 years, and they've been doing it just damn fine. And they are good. I do not want to take them. They've run a successful company. They are the sergeants in your team, and they're awesome. And now you're coming in and saying, I'm piling on something new. And this is going to make you smarter. This is going to make you faster. This is going to make you safer. This is going to make you fill in whatever it is that all of us have promised on the phone that you will do. These guys aren't looking for things to do. They're not sitting around going, gosh, I wish I had one more app to read, or I wish I had one more device to futz around with, or I wish management would send me one more report to do, whatever. So the reality is you've got to make sure that you're working with all three of those constituents. And if you're not working with all three of those constituents, you've wasted your time. And that's, by the way, true for management when we present our product to them. We tell them, if you don't have these other two constituents bought in, keep your money. Our system is relatively inexpensive. Matter of fact, it's very inexpensive. It's not even a blip on the local profitability side. But if you don't have those buyers all the way through the organization, it's a waste. I mean, David was talking about the French government asking people to download this app, and then 2% of the population did it. Well, that's a brilliant app. It's useless. And I'm not from the French government. I don't mean that. It's just the reality of it. So that's what we have found is, kind of almost going back to your earlier question, who's my buyer? It's almost everybody. I mean, and then who the decision maker is. It's almost everybody because yes, the CEO may say it, but he'll pass on but he's not controlling everybody's profit. Occasionally he will, or she will, control somebody's profit margin, but they may not. So it's just some, again, XYZ Utility opened yesterday without me. They opened without all of us yesterday. So having us coming in and saying, I got something new, even with COVID, is a challenge. At least we're finding that.
Paul, just one other comment, because while you've got a very good case to make with worker traceability for the COVID situation, one of the things that businesses were looking at, especially with construction workforces, tying in applications like Tracker ID for productivity studies, and tying into work packages and levels of work that say it ought to take this amount of time for this amount of workers, and then being able to tie that without the old paper timesheet that gets filled in and then transcribed into your financial management system. Are you getting pushback from the workforce, union, non-union, doesn't really matter? You've got a chance to look at it from a safety perspective now, but from a worker, big brother watching, I mean, how is that going?
Interesting. That's a question that we have found. Actually, management tends to be more worried about it than the line guys. Now, the reality is there's 5% of the people out there are going to hate it, and those are the 5% probably that are disappearing on you. But the fact of the matter is, and this is large construction projects, $1 billion and more, even $500 million and more, they're 40 to 50% of their cost is labor. So this is a project where you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people on site, and the reality is no one knows who's there. I don't care what you say. I'll pay anybody on this phone call $1,000 if they can go to a major site and tell me how many guys are there. It's not possible to know. So here's a whole sector that says, we got guys running around, so they don't know. So then you say, well, we're going to track you with this technology, blah, 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 blah. If it's universal, well, first of all, if it's COVID, it makes it a lot easier because now by me wearing a device, I'm protecting you because if one of us gets sick, we're the other one. So that's actually made it a lot easier. But when we tell them, I'm tracking you only, we actually had this on a site where one of the subs said, I'm not going to wear it, big brother, blah, blah, blah. And the site supervisor said, no problem. Tell you what, the money we were going to spend on Opal, we're going to go out and hire 3 high school kids with with pads, and they're going to follow your guys around all day. So they're going to do, not going to do anything. They're just going to stand there, and once every 20 minutes, they're going to check off where everybody is. And the guy, because as long as you're on my site, I get to know where you are. That's my prerogative. And it was so funny. The sub was like, "No, never mind. I'll put the devices on. Your point's well taken. Yes, while I'm here, I work for you." Because I got bad news, guys. We've studied on big sites. On most sites, unless they have a gated entrance, after the first hour, about 20 to 30% of the guys leave.
Yeah, I suspect that this whole pandemic is going to change the aspect of this and get it a little bit easier for use. But
yes.
Well, David, we are 2 minutes out, so if we're going to stay on point, I might need to turn it back over to you because we've still got some other questions I'd love to throw out. But
just one word about what just Paul said. I think there is also a big difference depending on the countries. What you have said here and the analysis you can do in the US may be very different in China or in France, and definitely for such things we have different. It's something which is crazy. If you just tell the people, okay, thanks to that you will be safe. I think this is the speech you can have in the US and so on. In France, people will say, I will save, but I will be tracked. Or I do prefer to be not safe, but not tracked. Okay.
Yes.
And in a lot of countries, and there is, when you see our solutions, it could be adapted everywhere in the world, what we have done. And you do think that there are so many differences, so many cultures different, that in fact we have to tune everything everywhere. And in terms of money, we have to adapt a lot of things.
Yes.
very true.
Walt, this is David. I'm just in awe of this session we had this afternoon. How about if we ask each of our presenters if they could just give us a closing comment, and then if you would provide us a closing comment, and then I'll wrap us up.
Perfect.
What do you want to
Paul, I'm looking at your smiling face. Let's start with Paul. We'll go Paul, Ed, Ron, and David.
Closing comment, huh? Gracious. Thank you. First of all, I appreciate this. This has been fascinating. Listen to others. I think these are tragic times. But at the same time, I think there's some great opportunities out there. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you. Easy to, if I don't know if I don't recall my contact information was on the system. It's very simple, paul@opal.us. And so happy to follow up with anybody on a call or email questions or whatever to keep this going. But thank you. And I'm really fascinated with everybody else's technologies. Really, really cool.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Citadel, Ron?
I would have to say, for those out there that are having to navigate the testing landscape and having to make a decision or having to walk back decisions that were made in haste early on and kind of course correct on mistakes that were made initially, because there's a lot of that out there. I would just simply ask those that are having to navigate this decision on the testing front to take the time to understand the landscape. There's so much misinformation out there as it relates to testing and options, vulnerabilities, hidden vulnerabilities. What does the accuracy level mean by testing methodology, by specimen collection methodology? There's a lot of variables navigating this particular piece of the equation. I would just simply ask to educate yourself on these variables in making a methodical, thoughtful decision. And we are here to help. 80% of our time is educating our prospects and our clients as they navigate this space, because it's fraught with a lot of misinformation, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ron. And since we've kept you up the longest, David, how about bringing us home?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me tonight. So, once again today, it depends where you are. Yeah, as Paul said, I think there are a lot of things that are very sad things and so on. It's very complex situation in a lot of companies, in a lot of countries everywhere and so on. But of course, there are a couple of real opportunities for changing things, a couple of things, for changing a lot of things, and a lot of opportunities for business and so. So we have to adapt to everything. We have to think outside of the box, and this is what we try to do every day, even if we, for the first time, when you think about that, what I will do tomorrow, but you will just have new ideas. So that's great. So thanks for having me from Paris. Definitely we do. From Paris since I was working on this app, but definitely we do have kind of offices everywhere in the US, including in Charlotte. So Shane Williams, who is the head of Charlotte office, is here if you have any question about that, and his email is even easier than mine. Thanks a lot for having me.
Perfect. We'll see you next time you're in town.
Yeah. You know, I never sleep, so you can have me when you want.
Apparently not. Yeah. All right, David. Just thank you to the panelists that took the time out of their schedules to participate on this, and it's obviously a critical time. And one of the things that strikes me is that while we individually, as businesses and countries around the globe, have really taken one on the chin with this pandemic, going through a session like this also reminds me of what business leaders, organizational leaders can do in taking innovation and technological advances and coming and putting solutions together that are meaningful to help us navigate our way through this. And, there's a technological aspect. There's, as we've heard, there's a process integration of how the organization that's receiving or using the platform puts it into practice so that it works the way that it's intended to work. And then finally, just the commercial aspects of, what's it going to cost? Do we have to do it? What does it cost, more importantly, about not taking any action at all? And these are complex issues, and it's something that everyone is dealing with. So I think it was meaningful, and I appreciate being a part of it.